Music appreciation 101.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Love Music More. I am your host, Scoobert Doobert, joined by a very, very special guest, Phillip Broussard. What's up, Phil? How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Good morning to you. It's a pleasure to be here. And this is cool.
I'm super, super excited to chat. We met for the first time in person at the NAMM show. For those of you that don't know, Phil has worked on some very big records with a bunch of really awesome artists like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Adele, Justin Timberlake, Eminem, Muse, and longtime person that worked along with Rick Rubin. And that's all really, really cool stuff. And so what we were thinking about today was kind of giving both music fans and up-and-comer producer engineers kind of a look at what it looks like to be in some of those big sessions, to set up for them, and then all the way out to the kind of the mixing process. So why don't we start there? So obviously you have a home studio. You've also worked in a bunch of other big studios and stuff like that. What's your mindset for even before the artist shows up? What do you like to do to like set up the studio, set up the vibe, and kind of do your pre-session work?
Sure. It depends, actually. Depends what we're going in for. If it's a rock band, if it's a songwriter, if it's a vocalist, and what have you, we will take that into consideration, not to mention personnel. Are we cutting a live band? Are we cutting a singer? Are we doing an overdub with a guitar player? So it kind of runs the gamut. But once we find out what the layout's going to be, if it's a live band session, then we figure out what we're going to cut live. If it's typically in a band situation, drums, bass, guitar, a piano or keyboard if we need to, and vocals. And then depending on where we are, we'll figure out we're going to put the vocalist in the live room with the band.
Cool.
And have like an SM7 mic and have them far away from the drums as possible just to get a scratch vocal. Or you've probably seen those, what are they called? The whisper rooms. You ever seen those booths? We would get those, use those and have them in the live room, or have somebody in like a legitimate vocal booth with a piece of glass on the wall where we can see everything. The idea is to keep everything live off the floor, including the vocals. There is a live element that happens, in music with a live band. And so once we figure out what that will be, then we'll go in. Hopefully we have enough time where we can load in gear. Cool. If it's all rented gear, load in the gear. Typically the day before, start setting up. We'll go out with start out with a plot on how we're going to place everybody for eyesight, lines of vision, clear communication. Does baffling need to happen between live guys? Are we cutting acoustic guitars? Are we cutting electric guitars? Amps need to be isolated, or it's going to be in a round setting, all acoustic, Cool. We'll take those into consideration, and then we start setting up typically the day before, and we'll hang mics, plug in EQ, compression, and start running test recordings. It might be me and another guy, might be me and a couple of guys, but we're definitely going to hang mics. We're going to get signal to Pro Tools, which we use, not anything else, or tape. We'll do a test recording or several test recordings. We're plugging in earphones, monitoring situation, and plug in a plate reverb or a hall reverb or a delay, anything that we think the song and obviously the genre of music would call for. We do all of that the day or the night before, so that when we walk in and the producer comes in and the band comes in, people can just sit down and start recording, start playing. They can hear one another in the headphones.
Yes.
I mean, we've got to make some adjustments because
for sure. Everybody plays differently. Drummer hits harder or quieter or whatever, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. And typically on a live session or a drum session, we'll typically start with the drums. And ideally, not everybody can always have the luxury of having 6 or 8 different snare drums, if not a couple of different kick drums.
Yep.
Because each snare will have its own different character, and depending what type of song it is, You might not want a big, low, fat snare. You might want a crisp, sharp, snare that's got some quickness to it. So we'll be able to kind of test a few of those out. We mark them.
Cool.
Same with guitars. We kind of go through some things. Hopefully we can get a couple band members there. Certainly when we're choosing drums, the drummer's there because we want to hear the drummer play. We want to select cymbals, hi-hats, kick and snare combinations. But typically, that's how we kind of approach the setup for the session in a band setting. And then so that when everybody hits the room, it's forget all the technical stuff and just start recording.
I like it.
Yeah. So there's nothing else to think about.
Nice.
It's just let the freedom flow. Let the creativity flow.
And you're able to hopefully eliminate some of that, linear problem solving. That's what one of my mentors said, that the recording day, that's kind of what it is. It's like you do the creative stuff on the front end, and then it's like, crap, this cable's got hum, or the drummer plays his hi-hat like way too loud, and it's like we got to mess with miking and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
That frees you up to do those things.
And it never fails. I mean, and when that happens, when you start recording, a channel on the console will go out.
Yes.
You just don't know which one. And so maybe in between a take, let's take 2 minutes. I got to move this EQ. I got to switch this channel strip out. I need to replace this mic cable, or what have you. It's happened. And who was it? Someone told me a long time ago that engineering is 90% troubleshooting than it is anything else. Agree. Because something's going to go. There's too many variables at play. Something's going to go out, and you just got to be able to deal with it swiftly and efficiently so that the creative vibe doesn't really get interrupted.
Yeah, I actually before I did recording engineering, I worked in tech support. And then when I went to, I was like, this is the same thing.
Totally.
It's really okay, where in this chain of 50 things is it going wrong? It's like Christmas lights, the old Christmas lights, where one bulb goes out and just blows out the whole thing. It's like, okay, we got to find it.
Yeah. And they used to mark one with a little bit of a shade on one of the tip of the light bulbs.
Okay.
But then you change that, and you can't find out which one it is after that. So you're going down the line. Yeah. So especially when it's on the tree. It's really tricky when it's on the tree.
Yes. I mean, I suppose that you could say that similar things could happen with patch bays. If you had a few of the connections go bad or something like that, it could just drive you crazy. For those that have seen in the recording studios all those million colorful cables plugged into a bunch of little tiny holes, routing all the outboard gear. How do you like to kind of visualize setting that up, your layout, knowing, okay, we're going to have these channel strips be for vocals and for bass and for drums, and then we're gonna, what's kind of your checklist when you're setting that stuff up, saying, okay, we're gonna get that LA2A over here, and prioritization and stuff like that.
If we're working in a pro studio, that's what they do for a business. It's a commercial facility. We pretty much leave everything in the racks. We don't pull anything out of the rack and get it close to us. We leave it all there because it's all connected. It's been there that way. We're not there to interrupt anything. But also, that being said, certainly when I think about the Rick sessions that we did with, Chili Peppers or System or Linkin Park or Slipknot, we typically would bring a set of mic pre's and EQs, a bunch of Neve preamps. We had our own.
Nice.
So we'd have a couple racks of 8, so it could be 16 or 24 different ones, in addition to a console, depending on how big the layout was. Obviously, a band like Slipknot, there's 9 guys in the band. We don't need that big of a console when it's a smaller band. But we typically would bring some outboard gear with us, a bunch of mic pre's, maybe some mics if we had them, or something very specific. Some guys, we would bring mics and bring some fun boxes, maybe a level lock or, a pedal or something to get some coloration. Obviously, we would mic our drum kits kind of normally how everybody would, right? Kick drum inside the microphone inside the kick drum or on the outside and on the outside of the kick drum, snare top and bottom, overheads, each tom mic'd up, and that could vary from different types of microphones for whatever sound we were going for. But also in addition to that, we might put something on an auxiliary send. from one of the drums or two of the drums or multiple of the drums and send it to a crazy smash compressor, like a level lock. Yeah. Now it's a devil lock on the software side.
Right.
Or
Sound
we would
toys.
use totally. Or we would use Sansamp pedal or something along those lines and we might even put something on the room mics. You know, we might have 2 or 3 different pairs of room mics. Some really far back, high up, maybe some low to the ground, close, maybe nice. 1 or 2 near kind of the kick drum and snare drum area.
For these room mics and these effect mics, are you rolling off top and bottom, like, or are you kind of like visualizing them differently, like those lower ones maybe getting more low mid and the top ones getting more air or something like that? Where you
could be, yeah, cool. We kind of experiment. We don't spend a whole lot of time on them because these are more things to add coloration and character. Cool. Yeah. Later on, as we get further down, we're not monitoring them in the studio during playback. These are just things that we're kind of recording. We listen to them to get the sound that we like and how it complements the sounds, but we just record them and kind of keep the faders down and don't really monitor them. Just make sure that there's no problems. We'll check on them every so often, but when we're cutting a band and when we're playing back for the band, we're hearing the raw mics. Cool. And we want it to sound in a rig session. We want it to sound like a record as it's going down as quickly as possible. Cool. So we're listening to all of the close mics and maybe a little bit of reverb if necessary. But typically things are pretty dry and in your face, so we can hear how the band is really kind of reacting to each other.
That's awesome.
But back to your question on setting up and those sorts of things, we would bring in mic pre's, EQs, and start setting that stuff up because so typically the external pre's, the knees and stuff would typically go for drums. We would also put bass in there too. We would put guitars in there too, depending how many channels we had. Because what that does is allows the first, let's say 24 tracks on the console not to be going to Pro Tools. These can be returns. It's a very luxurious way to kind of work now. For sure. But we could free up those faders so that we could kick drums coming back on 1, snare drums coming back on 2, and it just so on down the line. So we can turn things up and down on the console, not in the computer, right? Because if there's multiple guys in the room, one guy working a mouse on the computer, and we have control surfaces as well if need be, D command or something like that. But typically on the rig sessions and stuff, we like to work on a console. So we can really get that analog sound coming back, and we can mute, pan things really quickly on the desk and not do it in the computer so that we get a quicker sense of what we need to do if something's not working or how well something is working, and we like it this way. But also, that being said, since we're doing so many things on the console, so many moves and EQs or panning moves and so forth, anytime we're tracking, I'm pointing to the screen over here. I'm recording in Pro Tools, our interview here. But we're also printing down a live mix as well. Okay. So anytime we're cutting from the console, absolutely, because inevitably somebody, a band member or even the producer, is going to want to take home a rough mix.
For sure.
And instead of spending a lot of time, let's say you cut 5 tunes that day, instead of spending a lot of time at the end of the day making rough mixes, we'll just have a board mix ready to go. We can give them to them as they're leaving. Dropbox it, put it on a thumb drive, CD even, if we even still can use the CD term now. But that's what we do. So we always have a reference of how the tracking day went, and we can kind of hear the development over time. So anytime we're recording a live band, we're always printing a 2 mix.
I like that. That. And then that's cool too, because then you're able to kind of ideate and play with some panning things and maybe make some decisions down the pipeline for when you're in the mixing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'd love to talk a little bit more on drums, just because I feel like every recording engineer, that drums are so difficult because they're full frequency spectrum. You get the lowest of the lows, the highest of the highs, and it drives the entire tune, and everything else has to tuck within them. Like, you still have to have room for vocals, you still have to have room for guitars.
Absolutely.
Would love to just think about, just philosophically, when you're looking at, okay, I'm gonna do Slipknot or Red Hot Chili Peppers, and we're gonna get that live band feel.
Sure.
When you're close micing these drums, are you trying to are you trying to just get the most amount of putty that you can play with later in the mix, or are you trying to like say, okay, this is where I want the snare drum to kind of live in comparison to the vocal and to the guitar? Like, are you making those decisions in real time, or are you solving those problems later down the pipe in the mix?
We're making those decisions in real time. That's very thought out. Kind of goes back to when we were talking about the setups on drums and so forth.
Exactly.
We'll audition Slipknot, a metal drum sound, right? Very attacky kick drums.
Yep.
Pretty
ton of attack and
pretty tight snare drums, pretty tight toms, cymbals. A metal drum sound. We'll audition. The drummer, obviously, with anyone that we're working with, we want the drummer to bring in their drums. We want the guitar player to bring in their guitars, etc.
Cool.
That's their sound. That's their thing. That's their comfortability. Two very different drum sounds. Chad,
totally.
And Slipknot, Joey, and
cool. Yeah, Jay Weinberg.
Jay Weinberg. Thank you so much. Amazing drummer, by the way. So yeah, two very different drum sounds, and we'll audition different kick drums. We'll audition different snare drums, hi-hats, cymbals, toms, everything. We'll know, we obviously know what songs we're going to cut, or a pretty good idea of the batch of songs that we want to cut. And then we'll change snare drums and or kick drums based on those songs.
Okay.
Do they need a big open sounding snare? No, probably need something tighter, more quicker, et cetera. Does it have the body? Does it have enough chain or snare on the bottom to have that cut through? Or do you want it kind of boxy, kind of woody, big sounding drum? Obviously, the bigger sounding drum, more space it takes up in the stereo field. Same thing with a kick drum. Still got to fit bass, guitars, but we know the songs. And there's been times where we're working on a song as a band, and it's like, the snare drum's not working. We'll hear one or two takes, and it's like, I think we should. Let's play with the snare drum. Let's, or maybe I'm not saying these, Rick's saying this, or Greg Fiddleman, or somebody's making these decisions.
Sure.
If not the drummer in question, I don't think the snare drum's working. I don't like it. It's too tinny. It's too tight. It's too big. It's too soft. What have you. And we'll address it right then and there. Just so, because as we're cutting as a live band, we want to hear it sound, like I said, we want to have it sound like a record as quickly as possible. We don't really want to leave anything left to deal with later on, because that's just more work.
Absolutely.
And we need to make decisions based on what we're hearing.
That's a good,
right?
Exactly. I like the way that you're putting it too. Like, make the decision.
We're committing.
Make the call. Yeah, exactly.
We're committing because we're all here. We're all there. From songwriter to performer to producer to engineer, and maybe those people are mixing. Maybe they're not the people that are recording the record, and you never know. But that's not the job. We're not thinking about mixing. We're thinking about recording and performing. So we're going to, focus all of our attention to detail as if we're mixing it right now, right here, right now. Cool. We want this to sound as finished as possible. So if kick drum's not working, let's change it out. Snare drum's not working, let's change it out. The cymbals are too splashy, let's get something darker or crisper, And then that helps us get a better idea of what's starting to work. And then maybe we realize we changed the drums and we realize maybe the bass is the wrong bass too. It's the wrong amp.
Yeah,
it's the wrong.
You change one puzzle piece, and then the other one has to be tweaked as well. Yeah,
totally, for sure. And certainly when you get into writing, then when you're writing, then that can change too. And maybe somebody likes the drum sounds. It's like, no, I think this is right. Maybe it's the wrong bass. Maybe it's the wrong key. Let's,
right.
It's the wrong key. Maybe it's not an electric song. Maybe it's all acoustic song. Maybe it's the right drums and not sticks. Maybe we do blast sticks, the little hot rods. Exactly.
I just picked these up.
A brush.
This is so weird. This remix. It's like a wooden brush.
Hold on. Can I see that again? Who makes those? Vic Firth. I've not seen those.
They're rad.
Yeah.
They're rad. They're a bunch of alternative materials. I don't know if you can...
Yeah, for sure.
It's just really weird. It's like a brush, but it has a little bit more of the wooden attack. It doesn't have that brightness that a standard metal brush would. But I'm with you. Just changing all those different inputs is going to get a different output. And I also really like that what you keep coming back to is change the instrument itself, change the way that you're interacting with it. Like obviously mics and all of these things definitely play a factor, but when you have the choice, just change the snare drum. Maybe it's not the mic, maybe it's the source.
More again, not everybody has the luxury to have the budgets and the big studios at their beckoning call on a caliber of project like that. But more often than not, we always go to the source first because you've got to have confidence in your signal chain to know what you're doing. And it's one thing if you're really carving in on the EQ or you don't have the mic that you want, you've got to dig hard into compression or mic pre or whatever to get a specific sound. That's one thing. But typically, I would always recommend to go to the source first. We can be aggressive in recording, no doubt about it. Certainly if we're trying to put a fingerprint or some sort of stamp on the recording. But more often than not, it's easy. Easy is a subjective term. It's not easy to pull out 2 kick drums on a big metal drum set of like 5 toms and an array of cymbals. That takes a few minutes because you don't want to move anything after you got everything mic'd up and all your phase correlation. It can be tricky. But typically go to the source first because that might be the quickest thing that's going to make a change than your signal chain. So we have confidence in our signal chain. So we go to the source pretty quick. And you're going to know either that snare drum, and we might go through 6 snare drums, and really only 2 of them work,
Yep. And I mean, something that I had recently in a session, the drummer brought different kick beaters. And I was
of course.
That's a great idea. Haven't been in many sessions like that. Should do that every time.
Totally. You've got the hard on one side, the hard plastic, you got the soft felt on the other.
Especially when we're talking about 2 very contrasting bands between Slipknot and Chili Peppers, where it's like couldn't be more different kick drum like modalities or focuses.
Sure.
And so you'd probably be like, hey, maybe we use different beaters on those 2 different sessions.
Yeah, and I remember I think we had Chris Dave play on on the Adele stuff when we did 21, and he had like the old school soft.
Yeah, the felt kind of.
Yeah, the soft felt beater. Great sound.
Super good sound, yeah.
Yeah. And then also, like to kind of talk about his drum set for just a quick second.
That sounds fun. I'm a big fan of Chris Dave,
Big fat marching snare drum off to his left-hand side, and then you had rattles and little percussion things sitting on his drums and a very unique, identifiable drum set that was amazing. Completely different from Jay or from Chad. Obviously fitting the material, fitting the genre, but different sizes of cymbals. We would have tape on certain cymbals, just different sounds because it's really an ensemble kit. In metal, it's an ensemble kit, but it's serving a purpose as well. But when you have more open, laid back music that's got more space, you can have more characters, so to speak. Maybe lack of a better term, to have more character and more unique voices in the drum set that give something different than just a standard drum set.
Totally. Some of my favorite drummers, Nate Smith and Lewis Cole, they'll do like stacking splash cymbals on snare drums and super cool stuff.
Exactly. What was I going to say? Drum heads also play a big factor in that too. We were talking about the metal beater kick. You can also get the flam pads.
Yes.
Or without them. But Evans heads to me sound very different than Remo heads.
Definitely.
Totally agree. Those are, again, those aren't cheap, and you start running through heads. I know. Your cost is gonna add up, but and there's some really great drum heads out there, certainly for the sound that you're going for. So those are conversations, obviously, we all kind of have to have with the drummer going in, knowing, okay, this is going to be more of a ballad. We want more of those, fiber skin kind of heads with brushes and dark, warm cymbals with mallets than say, something very bright, pointy kind of thing.
Like a gospel record or something. We're going to, really bright cymbals and I love all that. I'm really curious. Two of my favorite things to talk about, overheads. We were just talking phase getting phase right and measuring stuff. Could you explain to the listeners? Some of the listeners, probably have never and never will go into a recording studio. Can you talk about kind of how you're measuring out the distance from the microphones, why that matters, and kind of how that plays into that end result?
Yeah. Oh, we're getting so technical. I love it.
Yeah, man.
It's fun. We measure microphones from the top of the snare head to the microphones up top.
Okay.
We want them to be equal, and we want them to, we want the drum set to sound, what did I say earlier? Like an ensemble kit, and how that snare reacts to those mics. Sometimes we're miking cymbals. Sometimes we're miking the drum set. It really sort of depends on what we're doing.
Right.
But phase correlation is huge, so that the microphones are getting the source at the same time as everything else, essentially, is what we're trying to achieve. And we do the same thing with room mics. We measure room mics. We want them to be equidistant as well. That number is arbitrary, whatever you decide to do. You can, and again, sometimes depending on the room, depending on the genre and the sound, we could have close mics, medium mics, and then far back mics. And we can play with those wideness and how far back, and that's going to create several different sounds of whatever we're going for. But, and I must say, for any drummer or engineer people out there, when you have a day off and you have your own place, or you have downtime at the studio that you may work at, if you're an intern or employee, see if your manager person will let you bring in a buddy with a drum set, and just forget the close mics on the drum set. Do the tests on the room sounds. That's super fun as well. And you can get some super cool drum sounds that way. In fact, one of my favorite records of all time is by a band called Talk Talk, English band from the 80s.
Okay.
And they made a record late 80s, 88, 89.
Cool, I'm pulling them up.
It's called Laughing Stock.
Laughing Stock.
Yeah. There's a whole story behind that about Polydor put it out, but their engineer, Phil Brown, was the guy who made this record. And he made a few of them. And Phil wrote a book several years ago now, called Are We Still Rolling? And he was an old Olympic studio guy, made a bunch of island records with Chris Blackwell, a bunch of Bob Marley stuff, Traffic, whole bunch of records. He's an older guy. Yep. But he made this Laughing Stock record with Talk Talk. And the drum sound on majority of this record, as he says in his book, is one single U47 microphone, like I don't know how many meters down the hall. Cool. But that's what he says. He said they recorded the whole drum set, but then in the end, when they got down to like final mix, they ended up using just the room sound.
Very cool.
And I thought, wow, and they had to offset it. I think for when they were doing overdubs, because there was such a delay.
Because there's such a delay from
and they were on like an old 3348 digital tape machine or something, or maybe the Mitsubishi. But I thought, wow, that is quite a statement to say that, the drum sound is just a single U47 microphone 12, 15 feet away.
Yeah.
But that's the part that Phil Harris, I think, was the drummer. I think that's the part he played. It was it fit the vibe of the tune, and that was the sound that they were able to like use, right?
Yeah.
But how many people have you said, "Oh yeah, we're just going to do a U47"?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll just that's what we're going to go for. I mean, that's cool if that you're going to start off like that. Like, that's a goal. Cool, I love it.
For sure.
But
I mean, that it's funny because that, like you're saying, sometimes that's a choice. Sometimes it's the necessity breeding that innovation, where it's like, we've got a U47, guys, like a very nice microphone, and that's it.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's make it work. Just like bedroom producers, like how many vocals on this microphone are there?
But also I would like to say this that I do think is important about microphones.
Yes.
And a U47, whatever, a Neumann Telefunken 251, any of these Uber brand textbook examples of like classic German engineering microphones. They're amazing. They're gorgeous. They have all these sonic qualities that we all love. However, what I think is something that's a bit overlooked, a lot of people think that if you record on those microphones, your vocals are going to be great.
Yes.
And they're not wrong, but there are better microphones. Scratch that. There are other microphones that suit better other people's voices.
Yes.
So some people think, okay, yeah, we're using a U47. It's a $40,000 microphone. It was made in the 40s and the 50s. It's all tubes. Great. And then there's a $400 microphone right here that you and I both are talking into, which is equally as good based on that person's voice and performance.
Yes.
And some voices, those large diaphragm microphones, they're not for everybody's voice. And so there became a stigma for a while there. Well, you got to sing on a U47. Yeah, I mean, you could try it, but then you should you should record, and we did this on tons of Rick projects for years and still do for the most part, where we'll have 5 or 6 different microphones and have a singer sing on we keep the same mic pre. We don't change that, but we'll change each microphone. We don't change, we'll change the level if it's necessary. But we'll go from an SM7 to a U67 to a C12, maybe a C12A, maybe a 251, and maybe a U47.
Okay.
And then maybe a Rubin, a Royer 121 or an RCA 44.
For sure.
And those are pretty drastic sonic qualities.
Huge.
But then come in with the vocalist and listen to them and not tell them which one's which, and just you sing it in the song, like just the first verse, and like, which one do you like? Because you at that point you're deciding with your ears, not with your eyes.
I like that. That's something I think a lot about with plugins, because they have those fancy graphic user interfaces, but sometimes they sound like crap, and sometimes the ones that look terrible sound amazing. It's
Absolutely.
Like, just got to turn off my eyes a little bit so I can actually assess what's going on here.
And there's also something to be said for just putting a plug-in on a track and not doing anything to it, right? Because like on an AP, because you do the same thing. You could plug in an API 550 equalizer on a snare drum, and you will hear on the insert of a channel, and you'll hear the difference without actually engaging. If you just engage the EQ but don't cut or boost any signals, you can hear the difference. Plugins are emulated to do the same thing. And I have been in situations where I'm mixing and I just needed, just a little something to add a little bit more character, and I can put a plug-in on and like, oh, there it is. But I'm not doing anything. It's just sitting there. There's a sound there. But you have to be open. You have to be open to listen to it and make sure. We get distracted by the visual aspect of things. Of
course, and I think that there's a benefit to mixing on a console that can make it more tactile, and also maybe like limit your options, and also have everything running through those transformers. So that's something that I've yet to do, but someday I really want to, because I've watched people do it. I've gone in the studio and I've assisted and stuff. But it just seems like there's another layer of mojo and tactile feedback, and that. Why don't we skip to mixing a little bit? Let's talk a little bit about processing this audio. What's your preferred way of like, budget be damned? What and I want you to mix. Let's say a rock band that you recorded. Where would you start? What would you want to do it? Where would you want to do it, and how would you approach it?
The dream, the ultimate dream.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I think. I mean, I have my own ideas, and I know, and that's what we're asking here. But also, I think it's important about the artist and what they want too, right?
Oh, cool.
It's comfortability, and also something
that
inspires performances.
Okay.
I might like to work in a studio that maybe somebody else doesn't like working in, because they may have a bad memory. So I got to take that into consideration, right? But all those be damned, right? We want that, because ultimately we're capturing magic, right? Or lightning in a bottle, however you want to phrase it. We want our artists to be inspired. We want them to pull out great performances. We want it to sound finished and inspired with intention.
Yes.
And emotion, right? I mean, because there's one thing, if you play a song way too many times, you can tell people don't care anymore, right? They're just they're ready to be done. They want to go home, whatever it is. They don't want to play the song anymore. It's time to knock it on the head and go home, and come back tomorrow and attack it again. But that being said, I mean, ideally, I love working on consoles. Neve 8068 is my favorite, or an 8028. something Class A, with obviously, great microphones too. And I love all of that stuff. And I've been fortunate, very lucky and fortunate to have done that for a large portion of my career. And not everybody gets those, but I like both, actually. I like working, I love working on a console so I can process things. I love combining and bussing microphones together to create a sound. If it's drums, if it's guitars, if it's vocals or bass or anything, I love doing that because it allows you to have flexibility and allows you to really do things that you can't do in the computer because, like you said, transformers, op amps, you can really carve on an EQ. You can just get super aggressive with pre's, and you can insert stuff on. You could drive outboard gear and just really get a lot of harmonic distortion if that's something you want to do. But I love combining microphones together to committing to a sound, right? On a kick drum, I definitely want to combine inside, outside mic. Snares, I want to combine snares as well to make it. So when I pull up the fader on a kick drum, it sounds like the kick drum. I don't want to fiddle with the balance of the two mics, et cetera. I want to commit that as quickly as possible. And then I love doing those things so I can kind of shape and craft the sounds. But I also like doing it I love mixing in the box. I have a console at home. I use as processing, printing things through. I can stick a distortion pedal, or I got an array of guitar pedals that I'll use as outboard gear too.
Love that.
Inserts and on aux sends and do all sorts of fun stuff as well.
Super underrated trick. The outboard guitar pedal.
And the pedal market these days is off the chain. I mean, there are some incredible sounding guitar pedals now that are really, really pushing boundaries. I mean, there are some fantastic manufacturers, and I love that. And I think actually it's kind of challenging some of the outboard 19-inch rack gear makers, I
agree.
It's a different price point too. You can get a lot more out of a guitar pedal for a lot less cheaper than what you can on some of the 19-inch rack. And that's not to slide against the 19-inch folks, because there's some really fantastic gear being made on the microphone level, on the compression level, on the equalizer level as well, on pro gear. It seems like the options now today are not anything what they were 25 years ago.
I agree.
And I also think the quality of that stuff is amazing.
And the controls. I mean, now you can have all of this analog gear that can be digitally controlled, and that was just, I saw that at AES in like 2019 or something, 2018, seeing a lot of that change. It's like, okay, that's a nice future because you're getting the best of both worlds now.
Absolutely. Absolutely you are. But anyhow, back to your question. I love doing that on the console and working that way. But I also mixing on the console, I still love, but sometimes budget and time constraints doesn't allow for it, depending on what you're doing, how you're doing it, in the budget and time that you have to do it. So sometime DAWs have gotten so much better sounding, as well as converters and everything in between. So I love working in the box as well. And I mix. I do a lot in the box. Like I said, I'll use the console I can bring things up and stem things out and use it as a summing mixer. I do that. I can use it as a guitar pedal where I'm just combining a bunch of stuff and printing it back in. But I kind of have a hybrid setup on the mix side of things. I'm doing a lot of mixing in the box, and then I'm coming out of my DAW and going into a rack of outboard gear. That's usually a compressor, an EQ. I have a tube stage that I could use. I have a pair of transformers I can run through as well, like some old Western Electric transformers as well, if I wanted to do that.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then I just print that back in.
Okay, that was my next question. So are you doing that for like individual tracks, stems, or are you doing that as like your two mix, your master bus, or all
two mix? Yeah, my master bus is all out of the box, and then I'm printing back in for the two mix. I'm printing back in so I can compare. So if I have a revision, I can listen to the mix, and then make changes. But I'm always printing back into the session
Nice.
Always done that. I've always done that. So
Yeah.
I find it's easier, more flexible to sort of do it that way.
I mean, that's something when I, if I get another sync check or what, that's my next like level up, is having some stuff that I can print my 2-mix out to, so I'm not just having to throw my, Waves SSL compressor and all.
Which is great. I use that too.
It's good. It's fun. It's a great compressor.
Phenomenal sounding. I mean, it's my favorite bus compressor. Yeah, the SSL.
I use that thing. Put that shit on everything.
Another big fan. I'm a big fan of. Do you know the Massey 2007?
I don't think so. No.
Amazing limiter. Limiter. Yeah. Massey, Massey. He makes fantastic stuff. That limiter it's like a mastering limiter.
Cool.
And even if you're not doing a whole lot to it, just very little makes a big difference. It's fantastic.
Awesome.
I use that as well.
This is a good question. What's your take on how quiet of a mix to deliver to a mastering engineer?
Well, quiet. I do two things.
Sure.
Well, so when I'm mixing and I'm doing like just straight up 2-mix stuff, I always print a loud bus, a separate track that's got like an L2 on it for loudness. And those are things that I typically kind of, give to band members because it's loud. Yeah. And people don't like the mystery of mastering. They want it. They want it to be loud. They want it to be competitive. And I get it. I understand. Not everyone is a record maker. Just because you're a musician doesn't mean that, you don't get to hear things loud and that you should hear it, not mastered. So I try to, and I don't spend a lot of time on it. Just make sure that's loud so that if they're going to listen in between a bunch of other songs, the levels are pretty similar. Totally. But but the mastering engine, I don't like a loud, super crushed mixes unless the band wants it, unless somebody likes it. I myself like to have some headroom.
Me too.
I like to have some headroom for the mastering engineer to do his thing.
Exactly. Because when we take away that headroom, and now they don't have a ton of stuff to work with because
they don't. Their job's
done for them.
And unless that, like I said, that is a specific desire, and you tell the mastering engineer, look, we've square waved everything. This is intentional, but I still need you to do X, Y, and Z on this, right? But typically, I try to keep it within a normal realm. And I don't mind getting it loud. I definitely want my mixes to be competitive as well, because I don't want, I don't want anyone to have questions about mystery of, is it too quiet or is it too loud or what have you. So I feel good about having it at a competitive level, but I always like to have a conversation with the mastering engineer too ahead of time, because I definitely need to know his scheduling and what, or she, could be he or she, what their scheduling is and what their time frame is, and then what, and I also like to kind of send them something just before we finish the wrap up, the final, just to give them an idea of what we're working on, so that they're not blindsided. Also, like, and I'm talking about professional mastering engineers,
for sure.
Guys, and typically guys that I have relationships with. Yep. So we're already familiar with one another's work, and it's like, hey, can you have a listen to this and just, it also depends what the project is. Maybe somebody doesn't want me to send a pre-mastering out, or anything like that. But I kind of like to get them involved a little bit. Like, okay, I want to do this. I got this new thing. I want to try this. Here's what I'm hearing, and we definitely have conversations about it. If their input is allowed to get creative with it. Sometimes, no, just do your minimum, light EQ, light compression, those kinds of things. Everything has a variable, but that's kind of the way I like to approach it. I like to definitely use guys that I know and have the relationships and have conversations with them and go have a back and forth. But typically, there aren't a lot of revisions. It's pretty quick.
Right. I agree. Yeah, once it gets to that stage. Just before that stage, I want to ask you a question. This is for me. So in terms of taking a collection of instruments and turning it into a mix, gluing everything together.
Yeah.
How much like parallel processing do you do? Is it mostly like that 2-mix, or are you like sending, drums and bass together and gluing them together? Are you gluing all the guitars together? How do you typically, obviously every mix is a little bit different, but how do you typically envision kind of the aspect of glue, parallel compression, parallel saturation, parallel EQ, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I do all of that.
Cool.
It all depends on the genre of music and the style. On how you're doing it. But yeah, I definitely do parallels on not the entire drum set. I like to, I don't, and there's a whole several different schools of thought on how everybody does their stuff. Totally. But for me, I typically like everything coming live. I say live, coming out of the same, I have a mix bus and I have everything coming out of the mix bus, and then I spin off and do parallels. And I typically treat my kick and snare drums. I do punches. I do a thing called punch. I do a thing called length. I do a thing called smash. And any number of items in the drum set may or may not get those. Typically, I'm trying to get a little, and those fader levels. Those fader levels they're never the same. I might drive a compressor or a distortion really hard, but bring the level way down so that it's just I'm maybe getting a dB out of the whole thing on the final mix, or whatever. But I definitely process kick and snares, sometimes toms, definitely rooms if needed. Sometimes cymbals to make excitement. Maybe I'll use them in the chorus. Maybe I don't. Maybe I only use them in the bridge.
Cool.
And those kinds of things. Same bass, obviously, is dependent on how that part's being played. I definitely do a processing thing. I'm usually trying to warm it up, but if it's an aggressive thing, then I'm using some distortion. I don't really like to carve out heavy EQ unless it needs it. If it's something that's very specific. And sometimes even a lot of compression on a parallel just tucked in is just all it needs too. Yes. Just very tucked in at the very bottom. And then vocals or guitars, I definitely do processing on guitars, a lot of parallels, but it depends. But I'm doing not a side chain, but I'm doing some parallel compression, sometimes aggressive, sometimes soft, just to kind of lift it in spots.
Keep that body in.
Side EQ as well, if not distortion or even reverb and delay throws. I try not to get really aggressive with the tracks, because then you start getting phase issues on just things pokey or too dark and so forth. So I typically throw on the parallel stuff after I've kind of got a pretty solid balance going on. I kind of want to hear it. I obviously I've heard rough mixes, I've got the refs, but I kind of want to get a balance and panning as quickly as possible to get the track really kind of flying, and then figure out, okay, this changes are happening here. We need to jump here. We need to duck down here. Then I'll start adding my processing to kind of, I don't really have like a factory where everything kind of gets the same thing. I'll start doing that after I kind of get everything balanced. Then I'll maybe mute some things and focus on the drums a little bit, and then feel how that fits with the bass, other rhythmic sections, and then focus on guitars and vocals, and then start kind of applying and messing with things. And I don't really do a whole lot to the stereo bus. I mean, I have my normal, I do have a cookie cutter, lack of a better term, but I have kind of a standard that I use because I want all the songs to sound the same coming on the mix chain. So I don't really change that. I calibrate it every time I print, kind of have to make sure that's all good. But I don't really dig in really hard on the individual tracks, but on the processing, it's kind of anything goes. And that's really where the fun can kind of happen, because you might be using it on the verses or just in sections of songs to create excitement or to create just something you don't know, but it really feels good, if it's a rhythmical thing.
I like that that perspective. And I also think that that's one of the benefits of in the box is you have a lot more control of let's let the song evolve in this way. Let's get really specific with automation and saying, like you were saying, like second verse, let's bring in this delay and this reverb and stuff. And then into the bridge, let's have it build in there with some parallel saturation or compression or whatever, lifting you through. So that's kind of what I see as the alternative benefit of in the box is the specificity, the automation, being able to do all the things that your hands couldn't possibly do all in real time.
Absolutely. And sometimes, you work on things, maybe maybe you spent all day on it. Maybe you're at the end of the day. Maybe you finished a mix earlier in the day and you're starting up a new track and it's coming together really quickly and you had some leftover ideas on the other one. And so, you imported those settings in as well. Like this really worked well for this vocal on this last thing or the guitars.
Yes.
I'm going to do the same thing here. Similar song, but you're kind of tired and you're kind of like, I can't tell the forest from the trees anymore.
Yes.
And you can put it away and you can go have dinner or do something else and not work for the rest of the night and then come back in the morning and listen with fresh ears. And you can tell if it worked or not, or you're like, oh, this was much better than I thought it was. And it's all there. You can adjust the automation. You can redo it. You can take it a bit further if you want, or maybe pull it back, whatever. But I love having that flexibility. Obviously, you can do that on a big console as well with automation. My console doesn't have automation, so I'm doing all the automation in the box if I'm stemming it all out on the desk.
Sorry for listeners. Automation is where you're automating the way that these levels are changing. So things get louder or quieter, or your hands to left or right ear. These little things. That's all. Just catch all as automation, just in case anyone.
Yeah, that's right. You're moving the well, in Pro Tools you can automate the panning and equalizers go popping in and out and anything. Absolutely. So it's literally automated for you once you make and write those moves. And I love that in the box. It's so easy. It's so quick. It's instantaneous. And it's always going to be there. I don't have to worry about synchronization issues or the computer failed. We got to reboot the computer or anything like that you had on the old consoles.
Yes. And that is a beautiful thing.
It really is.
One bonus question, because we're talking this. I've never worked with tape. I've worked with plugins that emulate what tape does.
Sure.
How much do you think those plugins are getting it versus not getting it? Like the mojo of tape, like throwing like a UAD Studer onto a track or whatever, versus actually going in there and doing it yourself. What, as somebody that has experience, like I'm just curious your perspective there.
That's a good question. I've never really A/B'd them back to back, honestly.
Totally.
And
that's even with that, just the feeling it gets. That would be a curious test. But I'm just curious, like your experience, your feeling of like, this doesn't quite have the mojo, or this is capturing it, or
I should do that. And the thing with me on tape certainly is more about the transient aspect on actually working with tape.
The way that it hits those attacks and those releases.
Because you're getting the tape compression there. You're getting second and third. And with the analog stuff, you get the second and third harmonic distortion and going through all of that stuff as well. So it's a little different. I think those plugins are great. And there's a couple of I use a McDSP. Who makes the other one? There's one, there's a silver one. I can't think of who makes the other tape emulation. I don't have the UAD stuff, so I'm not familiar with the UAD. But somebody makes another one that I've used from time to time, and I don't often reach for those. They're cool for character things, but I don't often reach for them unless it's something that calls for it. But what I love about tape is what it does for transient stuff. So things like cymbals, really smooth them out, make them warm, and still retaining the clarity. Still retaining that crisp top end. It rounds and soothes them out, and I know everyone has said that.
That's good.
So you've not heard that, but you definitely have heard that before. But it also does something to a snare drum. A crack of a snare drum is it'll do something. And also that depends on the tape you're using, and it depends the calibration or the alignment in which you're using. So how hard is your tape deck calibrated to hit it, and then how hard are you digging? How hard are you pushing those levels on the tape? Are you burying the meters, or are you just barely hitting them? Because that's going to make a big difference too.
Absolutely.
I don't subscribe to either. For a specific reason. Again, there's that age-old question: does tape sound is analog versus digital? Like, we're not going to have that discussion today.
We don't have enough time.
But because I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter as long as an emotional performance gets captured. That's what it is all about. It's about the music, But when I was on Chili Peppers over lockdown, we did everything on tape. The whole, both of those double records were made on tape, everything. And it was fun to do that. Yes. But it also, it reminded me of kind of the time it takes. You got to rewind back. You got to fast forward. You got to put a reel up. If a band's hot and you've just done 2 or 3 takes in a row and you need to switch reels, that's a 5 to 10 minute pause. You got to spin it off, put the other one up, get it back on, and hopefully you've prepped the reels to have leader tape on the front. You're storing it, heads out so you can just thread it on and get going. And I mean, it takes a couple of minutes, and the band may not, or any band, not just them, but any band may not want to wait. In Pro Tools,
you're in the groove. You're like, I've found my flow state. I want to.
We're rolling.
Keep it going. We're just loop record that. It's just
and in those
coming right back.
When I'm recording, or when we are recording, not just me, but when we're recording live bands, we like to record on the whole timeline.
Cool.
We don't do loop record.
No playlisting.
No,
just going.
because
cool.
because I don't have to worry about flipping things. It's less things to do. We're recording on the timeline to get a master take so we can hear them all in a row. Because that timeline, the timeline doesn't really become an issue or become standard until we get the master take. Then we got the master. We don't do anything. Then we'll start recording overdubs in that same. Then we'll start playlisting. But as we're recording a live band, I don't want to. We don't want to flip through anything. It's less to do, right? We just hit record and let it run.
Yes.
So there's no accidental pilot error. Somebody hit something or did something wrong, or this track didn't go into record. Everything's in record, and I forget how many hours you have now on Pro Tools to record on the top playlist.
Oh, it's very long.
It's super long. So we're never going to run out of that. And also, that being said, we try to do that by song. So each song gets its own Pro Tools session.
Oh yeah.
But
totally makes it.
But if they're like, hey, we just finished up a song, we did like 3 takes. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. Let's do another one. Okay, ready? 2, 3, 4. You just let it roll. They're just going to run right into it. We can put that into its own song Pro Tools session later if we need to.
Data. Boom.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Yeah, I like that.
So
I feel like that's actually a really good place for us to kind of wrap it up here, because I loved what you said about it's all in service of getting that emotional performance. Everything we talked about, what snare drum, what kick drum, what tape, analog, board, in the box. It's all about that.
Absolutely. And I love having those discussions, and I love having those tools available.
Yeah, of course. Not to diminish them.
And also, I was talking with someone the other day. You don't have to have, a major 5-star Sunset Boulevard recording studio to make a great recording now. And I don't want to take away from those studios, because we do need them for orchestras and big rock bands. But you don't need them. But I love that they're still here, and they're my favorite places to work. But if you don't have a budget, if you're an up-and-coming artist, you're an up-and-coming producer, you're an up-and-coming songwriter, you don't need to spend, that kind of money to go in and demo out your song. You can do it. We all have software comes on your phone now, GarageBand's on your phone. We have laptops, we have everything. So even if you have a 4-track Tascam cassette recorder, like, you can still do it, But at the end of the day, it's always about the music. It's always about the performance. It's always about the songs. And that's what people are going to relate to. And people who don't work in music are creative arts and they do something else for a living and they love music, that listen to and purchase music. They don't know if the vocal was recorded on a 47, U47, or if it was recorded at Sunset Sound or East West. And most likely, that doesn't matter to them either. It's the music, and does it transport them the way the music was written to transport them? And do they benefit by being a listener and getting what they need out of it? Yes. That's the most important thing at the end of the day. And I love talking about all the tools and the ways that we make records and the craft that goes behind it. Obviously, I chose that as a career, or more importantly, it chose me. But at the end of the day, I think it always is about the service of the music and service of the song and what the creators of that music are doing to make sure that that emotional content comes through the way that it needs to. And that's all we're really trying to do is keep that intact and keep moving forward and keep creating music.
And part of that is having professionals like yourself that get it and then have the courage to say, let's keep the scratch vocal. You know, those decisions that it's like, that's where the song is.
I watched a documentary a while back, Fleetwood Mac, Rumors.
Cool.
I don't remember which is the making of the record, behind the music or something, one of those. And I didn't know this. And I think Ken Calliott, who was the engineer on the record, said that on, what song? Is it Rhiannon? And that may be on the record before Rumors. But it was one of those songs. It was on the Rumors documentary. So it's one of the songs on there that Stevie Nicks, on one of her songs, they kept her original scratch vocal in a couple of the verses because she couldn't beat it. They beat it by sounds, but they couldn't beat the emotional performance.
Yep.
And she was in the room. I think there's, all kinds of bleed in the mic and stuff, and she couldn't beat the performance, and they kept it. And it's like, that is crucial. That's most important. And if there's bleed in the microphone, well, then you know that that's fine because you actually performed it that way. And that's not a bad thing. And sometimes if you listen to old records, you can hear guys in the live room counting the band off at a breakdown or at a bridge or at a stop. And as a younger listener, before I got into making records, I never really knew. I always thought it was the guys in a band, but like you didn't hear that until you started paying attention a little bit better. And you would hear guys count off and do things. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah. So he was in the live room, but the guitars sound different. The vocals sound different than the drums. As they start overdubbing and piecemealing the records together, you start figuring those out once you become a record maker. But I love those little things. But yeah, if you can't beat an emotional performance, someone had said the other day about the difference in the demo. What the demo is now compared to like the final record. And it's like, we don't really there are no rules about that anymore. No. The demo can become the song that's out on the radio.
Yes.
Literally, so there is no real distinction anymore because if that emotional content is there and the performance is there, you can try and beat it all day long, but do you actually beat it? Just because it sounds good doesn't mean that you've beat it.
Yes.
So
that's it, man. That's it. That's the statement. That's the mic drop right there. Phil, thank you for joining us and sharing all of this wisdom. That was really great. Where could they find some of your work? Maybe Instagram or website or anything like that? Where would be a great place?
Websites. I have a website. You can reach me there, phillipbroussardjr.com. There's just a couple of silly photos and then an email address. But if anybody wants to reach out, I'm on Instagram as well. All the socials, Facebook, Phillip Broussard Jr. I'm out and about. I'm just like everybody else making records, man.
Making music.
I love it.
Love.
Yeah.
And hopefully this podcast for the listeners made you love music more. That's the name of the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
After. It's my pleasure.
This is great. I had a great time.
I hope we can
really
do this again.
Very fun.
I feel like we've got a million more things to talk about. So I would love to do this again sometime.
Please, let's.
So let's definitely keep in contact and make some music together and all that good stuff. So
love to.
Once again, my name is Scoobert Doobert. You can check out my music at scoobertdoobert.pizza, www.scoobertdoobert.pizza. And be sure to subscribe and rate the pod 5 stars so that people can find these awesome conversations and we can keep doing them. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye now. Thank you.